We are pleased to have today in the workshop Professor Stanley Greenstein. He's an associate professor in law and information technology at the Department of Law, Faculty of Law, Stockholm University. He's also a co-worker at the Swedish Law and Informatics Research Institute and a Digital Future Survey faculty member. Stanley's main area of interest is the interaction between technology and law. In this regard, his teaching, research, and practical participation in project work has centered on the topic of artificial intelligence and its ethical and societal implications. And his talk today is titled Trustworthy Artificial Intelligence, a Legal Orientation.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today. And I'm going to just give the, let's say, the legal perspective and how I see Trustworthy AI from working with it as a lawyer. As we mentioned, I'm associated with this institute at the Department of Law, Stockholm University, this ERI, Swedish Law and Informatics Research Institute, where we discuss and investigate the relationship between law and technology. And when I'm not lecturing, this is just an example of one of the projects that I'm busy with within health. And using AI or machine learning to predict certain illnesses, and I come with the legal and ethical perspectives. And then I think it's also important to note from the start that I am a legal practitioner, and sometimes lawyers tend to be a little bit conservative. We are trained to look for risks. That is what our job is. We look for risks for our clients. We're always on the always out there looking for the risks with anything. And so that's part of our job. So sometimes while being a lawyer can be a little bit negative, sometimes there is a use for maybe just taking one step back and saying, well, is this what we want? I'm going to speak in kind of general terms. We don't have too much time. I could speak for days on the topic, but I thought it's always useful to think in terms of technology and values. So this is just an example, a well-known example from the 50s, 60s in New York, Long Island, where Robert Moses, the town planner, built lots of nice parks and beaches and highways to these parks, and then made very low bridges over these highways to the parks. And rumor has it that, I mean, the reason why there were these low bridges was to prevent buses being able to drive to these newly created areas, which in turn means that, you had to have a car to be able to drive to these very nice areas in Long Island, which in turn meant that certain people from a certain socioeconomic grouping were excluded. So it's always interesting to look for what values are we putting into the technology that we create. And I think it's safe to say that all technology has some kind of values, and it's really one can argue that there is no such thing as neutral technology. Technology incorporates our values, our human values. And so I'm from Cape Town, and this is just a picture that I took when I was on holiday around 2010. What is it? Well, under the highways, suddenly I saw that the authorities had built the pavements, and they put really sharp stones in these pavements. And obviously, what was the purpose? It was, it was before the World Cup soccer. Cape Town and South Africa was getting lots of guests visiting, and one wanted to give a good impression. So they built the environment so that, there could be no people sleeping under the highways. It's impossible to sleep on these in this environment. So you take a problem. The problem is homeless people, and you build away the problem using technology. And one can see this in other environments also. You have park benches. Some of them are built to prevent people sleeping or lying on the benches, whereas other benches are built to encourage it or to allow it. So I think it's really important to, you know, be aware of the fact that the technology that we create incorporates our values, whether we do it intentionally or not. And one can take this analogy to the digital world. Uh, in this case, the fact or advertising for women, they were research has shown that they were getting adverts for the not getting adverts for the high paying jobs. I'm not saying that this was intentional, but it is still a bias that creeps into the technology. So really important to kind of be a bit aware of the values we're putting in our technology. And even this workshop today, trustworthy AI, that is a value that we want to put into the technology that we are creating. Um, we want to create technology that has a certain uh, incorporated value system, something that we think is important. Um, Another theme one I would like to take up is that of the law. And I mean, the law is there to protect society from risks. Uh, but there's always the risk that the law, in trying to protect society, can also stop innovation. So this is a picture that I like using to explain that. This is because in England during 1865 there was a law called the Locomotive Act, and what this meant was if you had, cars were new on the roads, and if you had a car driving on the roads, you had to have a person, a man walking in front of the car with a red flag. And this is a metaphor for the fact that, well, the law, can be very restrictive because the car can only drive as fast as the man with the red flag can walk, even though the car in reality can drive a lot faster. So the law has to really strike a bit of a balance. The law needs to protect society from the risks with technology. At the same time, the law mustn't kind of stifle innovation too much, because that's not good either. Technology can be really disruptive. It really, the law and ethics, they kind of get into a bit of a balance, and then you get a technology coming along that really disrupts that balance. And this is just an example from the United States, 1890, where you have suddenly had the introduction of the handheld camera into society. And this really changed things because it coincided with the fact that a lot of the newspapers started to write a lot of gossip in their columns. And these two lawyers, Warren and Brandeis, they didn't like this development at all. They thought it disrupted privacy. What was in balance was now out of balance. And their efforts in the end created this new right within the American law, the right to privacy, or the right to be let alone, kind of trying to reinstate this balance, trying to reinstate privacy. But the point here is that it was really a new technological development that caused this imbalance, that was disruptive and required a new law to kind of uh, reinstate the equilibrium and make a society that was uh, that people wanted. I think it's also, from my perspective, really interesting to take 1 second to think about, well, what is law? And at the top of the slide, you've got, what we see as traditional legal instruments. You've got laws, preparatory works, case law, doctrine. These are all things that we recognize at all. But depending who you speak with and which lawyers you speak with, those of us working with IT, we recognize that there are other kind of instruments that are also regulatory and that we see as law. So ISO standards are law, codes of conduct are law, recommendations, opinions, even technology we IT lawyers tend to see as law. Law is anything that regulates human behavior. And so we have these two concepts: hard law, soft law. Soft law referring to these like codes of conduct, etc., whereas hard law refers more to like the law we usually think of when we think of the law: laws, preparatory words, etc. Um, Another notion that we heard about from the previous speaker, embedding law in technology. I mean, law up till now has been a reactive discipline. You have a problem, and when the problem arises, then the law reacts. The lawyer gets a telephone call and come and solve this problem. But development is this notion that, well, now we have to start building the law into technology, because the law technology is moving so fast that the law cannot really keep up. And this is just a breathalyzer. You have a law, a hard law, which says you're not allowed to drive a automobile with a certain amount of alcohol in your blood, but you can still do that. You can disregard the law. You can disregard the black text on white paper. But if you start building it into technology, come with technologies that represent the law, it is a lot more difficult to break the law. So the law, as it is built into technology, is a lot more effective. And this is the trend. We're now having to build ethics and law, for example, into self-driving cars. So we have to kind of determine the law and the ethical implications in advance. And so we come to this by design notion, the law by design. It all started with this notion privacy by design, and now we're even reaching more ethics by design. And if you need proof, you have the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, where Article 25 says you need to put in the law in technology at the start. So already when you're creating technology, you need to take into account the law and also kind of legal principles, privacy, data protection, etc., etc. So this whole notion of creating technology, building law in advance is definitely kind of getting traction. When you want to regulate something, there are lots of things that regulate within society. Norms regulate, the market regulates, technology regulates, but we also have ethics and the black letter law, the hard law that regulates. And when it comes to AI, we are moving from a situation where previously it was ethics that was kind of the regulatory tool, the legal tool to regulate AI. We're moving to a more hard law situation where you have the AI Act coming into force soon, and I'll come back to that now. Yeah, so I mean, the European approach to AI, why is it important? Well, AI is seen as very strategic. Um, and there's this communication from 2018 which said, well, we need some ethical guidelines in relation to AI. So we have this high-level expert group on AI that produced this document, Ethics Guidelines for Trustworthy AI, which is 20, 30 pages, and it includes a whole bunch of ethical requirements for AI. This is just some background information. What I think it is important to note that, I mean, and the pros and cons of it, but an ethical code is not legally binding, so you can't force someone to follow them, which is good because people tend to follow things if they don't have to. But also, if you want everyone to start following the same ideals, then it's difficult because an ethical code is not binding. Yeah, I mean, what is interesting from my perspective is, well, there's a lot of approaches, were taken. There was a lawful approach, ethical, robust approach. But in these ethical guidelines, the law wasn't really in focus. Um, it was mainly ethics and robustness that were addressed. And I think there was a bit of a wait and see attitude because there were other laws already that could potentially deal with AI. Um, but I think soon people started to realize that there is really a great risk with AI because it can be so manipulative, and here in this phrase, to the human mind itself. And I think gradually it was recognized that there is a need for more of a hard law, so that everybody will be forced to follow it. Um, yeah, and so there are some ethical challenges with AI, uh, which is kind of new to the working with AI. Um, Ethical challenges that we haven't seen before. And it can be that you're working with a database and you find things in the database that you didn't find, say, 6 months ago, but just because you're using new, more powerful algorithms, you start finding things. At different ethical cultures, even within a country, within the EU, what to do with information that you gathered from uh, somewhere or some place that doesn't have maybe the same ethical requirements as you. Can you still use that? I think it's also interesting that there's also a shift. I call it from negligence using AI to negligence not using AI. And I think previously, maybe it's probably the lawyer in me, but people were a little bit more afraid to use AI, and they thought, maybe what happens if we make mistakes? But there is really a lot to be gained from AI, and I think gradually a lot of disciplines are moving to the stance, well, we're actually being negligent not to use AI. So there is a bit of a shift where AI is saving lives. So much use can be gained from AI that we may be being negligent not to use it. I mentioned embedding law in technology. A problem with that is, well, if you kind of hardcore the law, how do you change it if it is hardcore into the technology? What if our ethical belief system changes? How do you change the technology? There is an issue of machines potentially deciding over life and death, especially within the healthcare systems. Competing rights is becoming important. You have the individual rights against society rights. And I also mentioned building the ethics or building law into technology in advance. And this is just an example. It's in Swedish, but it's from the newspapers, and it's an issue of, well, so much can be used today with precision medicine. The problem is you need to be able to use everybody's data in order to help the individual. And it's becoming an ethical issue in all societies. Can we use everybody's data for the sake of, uh, moving health forward, healthcare and medicine? And this is a typical situation of, the individual's rights against the collective rights. Can you use everybody's health data to kind of move the whole healthcare system forward? Or do those individuals have a right to say, no, you can't use my DNA because that's private? So technology, and especially AI, is bringing with it a whole bunch of new issues. Uh, Getting to the law, I'm sure you're familiar with the GDPR, and the GDPR is always relevant when it comes to AI because AI is all about data. I'm not going to talk about the GDPR, but I think one cannot take into account legal requirements of AI without referring to the GDPR because AI is data. We mentioned the AI Act earlier, and that is coming into force really soon. We don't have a formal document yet, but it has been agreed upon between the Parliament and Council at the European level. So in maybe a couple of weeks, we'll have a final text. The AI Act is really interesting because, it was recognized that this ethical approach was probably not enough. So in April 2021, the Commission put forward a text to the AI Act. And since then, a lot has happened in the negotiations at the EU level. AI Act is really interesting because it will be the first hard legislation of its kind in the world regulating AI. Uh, Also really interesting, it will have the first kind of legal definition of AI or AI system. And the idea is to have this law that where you are required to divide to put AI in a certain category. There's certain risk categories, and depending on the risk for health, safety, and fundamental rights, uh, AI will be. You will have to put it in a certain category, uh, and then depending on which category it falls into, you will then have certain obligations based on that category. And obviously, there is one category where AI is forbidden, and that's because the risks to health, safety, and fundamental rights is too large. For example, social profiling. So this will be an interesting development, and it's going to bring lots of challenges because one is going to need to interpret which risk category a certain AI falls into. And then there's even other legislation that's on the horizon that we shouldn't forget. For example, the AI Liability Directive, which is also going to be, it's also in the pipeline. And this is to help consumers kind of sue someone uh, if they think that they've been wronged by AI. And this act helps with kind of evidentiary matters. How do you collect evidence in an AI environment that can be really difficult for a consumer, for example? So some parting thoughts. I mean, there's one of the biggest risks with AI is that it makes us humans dumber. And there's a really big risk with that because we start relying so much on the technology that we actually lose the ability to, you know, uh, answer questions based on the technology. For example, why did I not get that bank loan? Well, I don't know because the black box said no. And we heard all about explainability. So that is going to be uh, really important. That we just don't let AI take over or processes. Uh, Another issue, what do you mean by AI? I mean, AI can mean so many different things to so many different people. I think it's a really important question to ask. What do you mean by AI? I have my kind of notion what AI is, but it may not be the same as your notion. So getting on the same page when it comes to the technology is really important. From a legal point of view, a challenge is that lawyers are going to need to understand more about technology. And yeah, I think technology people are going to have a bit of responsibility in actually explaining the technical stuff in a manner that non-technicians understand it. AI is positive, as I mentioned. You all know that, but there are risks, and these risks have to be addressed in order for people to trust it. And I mean, all my discussions about AI, whether it's legal, philosophical, I mean, um, in the end, everything boils down to one question, and that is what kind of society do we desire? Uh, and it's quite an existential question and not an easy question to answer. But from my perspective, my discussions, that is kind of the main question that everything in the end comes down to. I thought I would just end off with a quote that I use every occasion just to put out there. Uh, and I won't read the whole quote, but I really just like the first part: responsibility, transparency, or auditability, incorruptibility, predictability. and a tendency to not make innocent victims scream with helpless frustration. I think that's a great starting point. Making technology that doesn't make us want to scream with helpless frustration is a pretty good start to to building this AI. That is all I had to say. A lot in 20 minutes, but yeah, questions maybe.
Nuria, you are muted.
We can't hear
Yes.
you. Okay, thank you. Yes, I was saying that there is a question in the chat coming from Michelle that has been answered by Rafi also in the chat, but maybe we can see both the question, the answer, and then your opinion. Okay. So the question was how to balance the laws related to AI without restricting too much the innovation, which is something you mentioned at the beginning with this picture of the car and the man, the beginning with the red flag. The answer from Rafia in the chat, it says that it is still an open question. One important thing is that regulations for high-risk systems are high and strict, with less restrictive for medium or low-risk systems, which is the basis, as far as I understood from the AI Act. The first thing is to identify the purpose of the system, so the risks that may come with this kind of system. So please, your opinion about that.
Yeah, and I think that the kind of regulators have really tried to get this balance, and it's really not easy at all. What they do incorporate in the AI Act is the notion of sandboxes. So where you can, in a really closed environment, test products. And test it with the help of regulators and notification bodies to try and eliminate the risks, and in that way kind of let innovation go forward. So that's one way that innovation is trying to be promoted, that you have these areas where you can test the AI products without putting them on the market, so to speak. But it's always going to be a contentious issue, and I mean, there are lots of things that kind of say break or stop innovation when it comes to legislation. And once again, it comes back to the question, what kind of society do we want? One can argue that the GDPR is a bit of a brake on innovation, having to put all these requirements in place for the GDPR takes lots of resources, and it is restrictive. You can't just do anything. Then the next question is, well, is this desirable for the society that we want to create? And that will kind of determine if it is worth it. And it's the same with AI. Do we just want this technology bullet train to go forward without us even thinking about the consequences? Or maybe it is worthwhile just taking a few seconds to consider the risks with this technology. I've probably spoken too much now.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I can just take 1 second to answer the question in the Q&A about the military. And it is interesting that the military is excluded from the AI Act. So it doesn't cover military contexts, which is interesting. And it also kind of highlights the political element to regulating AI.
So does this mean that military systems don't need to fulfill this AI Act when it comes?
No,
to a regulation.
no.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Uh, yeah, which then comes to the next one, question. Well, how should we go about regulating AI in the military? Maybe there's a role for other organizations, for example, the
Mm.
United Nations, etc.